Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome back to The Gentle Voice. We are doing another one of our collaboration type of things. This one, we have Brother Jordan Danser.
Hello.
And he's going to be here talking about, well, you've seen the title, how your faith has influenced your mathematics, and then the inverse of that, how your mathematics studies have influenced your faith. So before we get into that, we'll do introductions like we usually do. I am Adam L. Spain with The Gentle Voice, the Interplanar Crossroads, and you can find either one of those on YouTube or Rumble. And by the time this comes out, we should be mirroring them onto that manually, so we won't have a problem with desyncing. So they should both be up there at the same time. That's the plan for that. And we may have branched out into releasing these as a podcast as well for people to listen to, because that's very doable for The Gentle Voice, at least the things that it does right now, and the Interplanar Crossroads should also be able to do that. But let's let Jordan introduce himself and what he does. Sure.
My name is Jordan Danser, and I live in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm an evangelist with the Churches of Christ. Been working in this area for, by the time this drop, well, I don't know when it'll drop, but as we're recording real time, about 18 months or so. Moved there in August of 2022. And I guess the reason we're talking about mathematics is I did my PhD in mathematics at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. I studied differential geometry, invariance, and the geometry of nilpotent Lie groups is what I was specifically interested in, for those of you who know what that means.
Well, there you go. Well, I believe I've heard him say before he's a recovering mathematician.
Indeed. It's hard to recover. Sometimes those habits really go deep.
All right. Well, that's who we are. And actually, if they want to find some of your content that he has put up on to YouTube and stuff like that, you release with the Mended Collective.
Yeah, I'm a part of the Mended Collective. We're also a Christian content organization, and we release videos on the gospel and on Christian living, these sorts of things, hoping to equip churches to advance the gospel through the Great Commission and to fulfill that charge. So you can find us on YouTube, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. We've got videos releasing over there and then supplementary content on Facebook and YouTube. And then also I'm a part of a work that I started kind of as a COVID project that didn't really die, of 15 minutes and a big idea. It's a podcast where we take a couple verses of scripture, try to find one big idea in it, take about 15 minutes, give some supporting ideas, and just march through the text slowly.
And that's YouTube and on the various podcasts.
Wherever you get your podcasts, it should be there.
Okie dokie. So, with all of that covered and said, let's turn the timer.
All right.
And start talking about how your faith has influenced your mathematics. And since this is more of his particular area, though I have a fascination with mathematics, we'll let him start on where you would want to start talking about this.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing I think that how my faith has influenced mathematics is that as we have belief in God, philosophically we see a world that is ordered. And so mathematics makes sense as living in an ordered creation where things work and where proposition and truth exist. And so as I come to mathematics, it comes with the fact that this isn't just some endeavor that's me carrying out my biological process. There's actually an order and a structure to this that we can see in the real world.
So it would actually, at least from what I'm seeing in your opinion, it would actually make it easier to study mathematics because you're making a presupposition that the world and universe is ordered.
Yeah, definitely. It makes it easier to do that, and in some sense it makes it make sense because mathematics is much about building rules and building axioms that lead to propositions and facts that ultimately and hopefully explain the natural world. That we can model physical phenomena and things we see through mathematical structures, whether that be biology or physics or economics or any of these things. We can model them with mathematics, and that presupposition of the world exists and the world makes sense and it can be modeled, we can understand it in some way, is the whole idea of why mathematics exists to begin with. So that presupposition of a creator for me gives that work meaning.
And that can be something interesting too. A lot of times math is thought of as personless and emotionless in the way it's presented. But when you look at it and you look at the the mathematical truths and axioms, as you used that word, those found in nature, not found in the textbook.
Sure.
Mind you, you find them out in nature. It makes it all that more personal when the math starts to make sense. You know, it starts to click in your head for some of us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you've got these rationale, these questions you want to answer in the real world. And then, you know, one of the things mathematics really does, though, is it does step away from that, right? It allows us to, you mentioned that it's kind of viewed as this cold and isolated thing. And there's a sense in which that's not wrong. That in some sense, what you do is you have your real world problem you want to solve, or the situation you want to analyze and build a model for, and you kind of just forget as much as you can and boil it down to numbers and formulas and functions and models and structures and data and this sort of thing. And then you kind of forget about the physical aspect of the problem and say, how can I solve this problem? Are there certain assumptions I can impose on the problem that maybe simplify it? And then once I do that, can I then bring those assumptions back over and recover something? Or have I totally destroyed all the data to where it's not helpful?
So there you go on that. But the ability to take math and apply it to the physical world is something that is, from a faith perspective, we would just expect to be the case.
Yeah.
This is something that someone from an atheist perspective might bump into and have a problem with, because math and numbers specifically are abstract. They don't physically exist.
They don't exist,
And they're not even forces, which is a separate category of things within scientific study. They're not just abstract concepts. They are abstract concepts, not forces, not mass, not anything like that.
Yeah.
But those things are things we are seeing to be axiomatic within this universal structure. And from a faith perspective, that will make sense to us. And so we don't, from a perspective of someone studying mathematics from a Christian idea, not only do you have that idea that there's a creator, which several belief systems do, you have not only is there a creator, but there's a creator that cares about us and has thus designed the universe to work in a way that is in our favor. And you can get away from that problem, that catch that a lot of more atheistic or not agnostic individuals can get into, where they're just trying to wrap their head around the philosophical part of, well, why does this number make sense?
Sure.
Why does this happen? And even though math on the formula side breaks away from that, it returns to it eventually, like you mentioned, when you're having to come back and then say, can this be applied, or is this applicable?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, as you talked there a little bit about, numbers and their existence, the main school of thought on the philosophy of mathematics is that numbers do not exist, which is an incredibly strange thing to say, because you're like, well, they're right there. I mean, they're on the board right here. Obviously they do, but in terms of a reality in our world, they are rather some sort of imposing of our consciences and finding structure and order in that way. And so because of that, that takes a mind, that takes information to be able to do that. It's not you can't touch a number. I mean, to be like, in some sense, it'd almost be like an abstract concept, like love or generosity. I mean, that doesn't exist per se. You can't find that somewhere, but you can see it demonstrated. And from a faith perspective, it makes total sense to do that sort of thing. But it's a lot harder to ground that in other ways. And so faith really makes mathematics to where it's not just a fatalistic game. It makes it to where it has a real meaning and can find real structure in a truly important way.
Mm-hmm. And with you mentioned earlier about coming to this and having it where you're not just I'll use another person's way of phrasing it. You're not just a flesh robot carrying out the biological processes of your body.
Right.
By having a faith that goes into that mathematics with an understanding of there being purpose to these numbers, all of a sudden you can see not only the numbers and how they work and how this mathematical equation, like the golden ratio being present all over the place, and lots of different mathematical formulas being true no matter where you are, presumably, in the universe. barring some outside influences, which would be unknown factors that you do not have.
Well, but even then, if I can, they would still be true, right? They would just be in a different way, right? Yeah. Yeah, that just because you have a physical factor that changes the system doesn't make the laws of mathematics untrue. It just means that the laws of physics are behaving in a way that's different than you would normally expect. So yeah,
There you go.
so you're fine.
Or not understood yet.
Exactly.
So different or undiscovered, that would be the way to phrase that.
Sure.
But that instead you're coming to it and saying, well, I understand that these are biological functions, or I understand that this piece of physics works this way because of this equation or that. I can now better appreciate, perhaps, the why of it, and even be better at applying that math to real-life situations. Because if you do believe that you're just a flesh robot out there carrying out biological functions, math is the most moral thing that you have to run off of, because it is the most axiomatic of all the sciences. It is just math. We say that, you hear that said a lot sometimes, it's just the math, or variations of it. And if that's true, then that's not wrong. If it's true that we're just flesh robots, you may as well follow the math and do nothing else, because nothing else really matters. The math, you'll at least get some satisfaction out of figuring out the math. And I don't think that's a problem that a lot of Christians have to run into.
No, not at all.
Dealing with that.
Not at all.
So a question might arise with this faith in mathematics. Is there a specific instance where you felt like your faith had influenced your mathematical understanding in a certain way, or changed the way you had approached a mathematical equation?
Oh, I'd have to think about that. I can't say in a specific setting, you know, I'm looking and trying to solve a specific equation or solve a particular problem or anything like that. But more just the idea that we're seeking out, you know, the structure and order that God's created in the world. And so there's a level of, I didn't know quite which direction we wanted to put this, but there's a level in which whenever we do anything to the Lord, we do it as worship. You know, that all of our job and all of our pursuits are worship in some way. And so I don't know that there was a particular moment where, like, you know, you could say, you know, if you were in a business deal or something and you've got the choice to be unethical or ethical, right? You could say, well, the gospel changed the way I went the ethical decisions, like that. It's not like there's really any of those with mathematics necessarily, because there's no real great moral or ethical dilemmas. But I would say that just the continual pursuit of seeking the inexhaustible wisdom and knowledge of God is one of the ways that my faith has influenced that. That whenever we, you know, all these propositions and axioms that, you know, we compile into the human consciousness still pales in comparison to the knowledge of the Almighty. That every truth about the Pythagorean theorem, to trigonometry, to integral calculus, to, you know, invariant group theory, and all these things, like all those facts are known in the mind of God. And so as we go forward into that, you know, I can see and say, hey, this is a worthwhile pursuit. And so if I could say that would be the one thing that we're kind of hitting from different angles about how faith has influenced mathematics, to say this is a worthy pursuit, this is a worthy goal, this is a good thing to follow, because we learn the mind of God in some ways.
Well, that is true, that we do, that if there was a language to the universe,
sure,
it would be math. It would be a breakdown of numbers to understand certain processes and things like that. At least that's what I think. You can disagree with anything in the comments if you want to.
Yeah, so. I mean, and it goes way beyond numbers. I mean, there's a lot of other structures, algebraic or other structures that we can use to define meaning and things like this that are really helpful to try to understand these sorts of things and uncover what is the nature of reality in some sense,
or at least how that nature of reality processes itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
So. You mentioned a word there, the infinite understanding of God, and it's a lot of people I've seen make videos, or several people, I shouldn't say a lot of, several people I've seen make videos about mathematical pursuits and faith and how it has affected them, is that The concept of infinity
Yeah.
is not something that a biological creature, a solely biological creature, is going to be able to easily comprehend, much less grasp.
Okay.
And through the study, you can start to understand this just like, as far as we know, pi just goes on and on and on and on and on. If that's the case, something has to process that. We have to have a faith or an idea that that's going to be continuous. So we have to have an understanding. And what are we going to put that faith in? How's that faith going to be manifested? A lot of people put it in just their own understanding. A lot of people try to put it into different people that they follow or think about. But when you come to the concept of infinity in a mathematical sense, and you see that it just goes on and on and on, and it's consistent the way that you keep on doing it, and you don't run into contradictions as you go on.
Sure.
There has to, by, let's say, by logical necessity, be some kind of order behind that, because order doesn't come from chaos, and math is not chaotic. I know that there are people who try to talk about chaos theory and stuff like that, but chaos theory in a mathematical sense can't be correct, because you still have to have them. There still has to be math in the chaos, which means it's not chaotic.
So let me give you what chaos theory is. Chaos theory is basically trying to look at things that get it's actually trying to figure out what the structure is behind things that get very crazy very quickly. That's what it is. So, take for example, if you, let's say you were hitting a ball with a bat, right? And if you slightly perturb the ball, or the angle of the bat contacting the ball, let's just say by 1 degree to the left, you have a pretty measurable, predictable amount that it's going to sail in a different direction, similarly to the right. So it's very, it's going to kind of fall in this pattern. And depending on the angle, it may fall more that way than it would with a little perturbation. But regardless, you can still say, hey, it's going to go this way. I can put a function on it pretty easily. Whereas chaos theory, what that's saying is after a certain epsilon or a certain given amount of time, there's no way to say how bad it is, right? So imagine if you hit the ball and it's like, well, you turn 1 degree to the left and all of a sudden it ends up in, Tokyo or something like that. That's the idea of chaos theory. And so, something like, this is where, let's talk about weather models for a second. Weather models are modeled on chaos theory. So the trouble with weather is that if we knew, if we had infinite knowledge of every single point on the earth, what the conditions are, we could predict weather perfectly. We could predict absolutely perfectly. The trouble is we don't. And so what weather models are doing is they're interpolating. So we're in Arkansas, and let's say we have the temperature in Fort Smith and in Bonanza, but we don't have readings in between. There's some model that's going to try to interpolate based on, let's say it's 5 degrees cooler here. You can kind of guess, okay, at some point it's probably 1 degree cooler, 2 degrees cooler, 3 degrees cooler, 4 degrees cooler, whatever. The trouble is, it's hard to say how that happens. Things like mountains can affect that. Things like trees can affect that. There's all sorts of things can affect it. And so what a model is doing is it's guessing what that in-between data is, and then it's making a prediction. And then there's lots of different models that you use. And so whenever you see on the weather, it's a 90% chance of rain. That's saying 90% of the models that we used to interpolate this gave us rain. But there's still that 10% chance it doesn't rain, because there's all these other things, there's all this data we don't know. And so what chaos theory is doing is it's not saying there's not an order to it. What it's saying is there are some things that whenever you start the clock, it's not going to be long before you have no handle on it. That's really what chaos theory is doing.
Okay. Well, then perhaps my dispute is with the naming of chaos theory versus the actual application of chaos theory, because that's not chaos, it's just variance. But
it feels chaotic.
But as a faith, from bringing it back.
Sure. Sorry, there you go. That's free for those of you watching at home. No extra. You should subscribe, but you don't have to pay extra.
Yeah. Bringing it back to the faith idea.
Sure.
We can go into that as Christians and know we serve a God that understands all those variables, and that has in the past affected those variables to
absolutely.
affect changes, and not just affect changes, But when we look at it with faith, with an understanding and view of mathematics, we can look at it and say, not only did God affect certain things in the natural world to have this happen, not rain, stuff like that, he affected it in such a way that it didn't disorder the rest of the world around it.
Yeah.
Now that takes massive amounts of, there is no computer that can do that.
Sure.
And there will never be a computer that can do that. It's an impossible amount of calculations for even the most logical mind.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
But through faith, we understand that we see effects of different things like that, and we're like, wow, that's pretty big God. that's a God you really, when he says he's infinite, his thoughts are beyond our thoughts.
Sure.
That's crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean, you've got some incredible factors there. Just when you think about the sheer just impossible size of things, and it doesn't take long to run into mathematical problems that you just couldn't do anything with, When I was doing my dissertation, we had to do some very large high dimensional things, which we can talk about whatever that means later. But I mean, we're quickly getting into operations that I just kind of quickly did it by hand to realize that the number of calculations is like more than the particles in the observable universe. I mean, this is just one small question. There's tons of questions that you can get into. And so what that means as a mathematician is I have to try to find some way to work around that, right? That's an obstruction. I'm not gonna be able to compute that. So we got to figure out what's some other way I can reduce the problem to a simpler problem. And in that, you really get an appreciation for, maybe that's starting to go the other direction. I don't mean to do that before with where our clock's at, but that's starting to go the other direction, how mathematics has influenced faith for sure, is that, to me, the right response of any scientific endeavor or any pursuit of truth, the right response after is worship. If you think about the scientific method of, observation, hypothesis, testing, reevaluation, to me, whatever the nth step should be for a Christian is worship. That whenever we see this, we should adore God and his wisdom for these sorts of things. And whenever I've gotten into mathematical problems that are just incomprehensibly big, you really get an appreciation for that.
Yep. All right. Well, we're coming to we're a little over halfway of our 30-minute mark before we switch over to our next subject. So, is there any final thing that you would want to bring up regarding faith and how it has influenced the way you practice mathematics and stuff before we switch that over?
I think that's a good spot. Sorry to segue on you too fast there.
Okay. Well, we hope you have enjoyed this discussion on how, at least for Brother Danser, how faith has influenced his mathematics and the way he studies them and stuff. I'm not sure how much study he allows himself to do being a recovering mathematician now. But Lord willing, you've gotten something out of it. Lord willing, you can see that this can help build up your faith to know that the math works out, we might say, for there to be a God. As always, have a great day. God bless and enjoy. Bye. I decided not to put a mathematical equations up there or something, because I was just trying to keep the numerals general.
There we go.
Ready?
Ready when you are.
Okay, I'll stop that recording.
All right.